Ancient Egypt has long been considered a mystery to the rest of the world, a sort of book with closed pages. But everything changed on July 19, 1799, when, during Napoleon's expedition, a French soldier discovered a large stone about 35 miles east of Alexandria. This stone, known as the Rosetta Stone, unlocked the secrets of a language that had been silent for millennia. The translations on it turn out to be the key to unlocking the myths and mysteries of ancient Egypt, a civilization shrouded in mystery for so long. Thanks to him, today we can trace Egypt's history and seek answers to questions such as, how does a civilization rise from the dust to shape human history for millennia to come? How did Egypt withstand the invasions of empires and still preserve its identity? This is Egypt's story rolled into just minutes. In the 6th millennium BC, climate change began to transform the lush grasslands into what we know today as the Sahara Desert. This transformation forced early tribal peoples to migrate to the Nile River, where they developed a more established agricultural economy and a more centralized society. This is a classic example of necessity as the driver of progress, as it was the changes that gave rise to Neolithic culture. During the Neolithic period, several pre-dynastic cultures arose independently of each other in Upper and Lower Egypt. The Badari culture and its successor, the Nagada series. These cultures are generally regarded as the precursors of dynastic Egypt. One of the most interesting aspects of this period, however, is the emergence of Egyptian hieroglyphic writing. It first appears on pottery from Nagada III around 3200 BC. This marks the beginning of a written language that would tell the story of a people ahead of their time. 50 years later, King Menes united Upper and Lower Egypt, creating a unified kingdom that would last for millennia. Thus was born dynastic Egypt, a period during which Egyptian culture flourished. The first two dynasties laid the foundations of the Old Kingdom, an era during which it is now generally accepted by the scientific community that the erection of the pyramids began. The Pyramid of Djoser, built during the Third Dynasty, is a marvel, but it is nothing compared to the Great Pyramid of Giza, created for Pharaoh Khufu. This pyramid was so magnificent that later classical historians called it one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus estimated that it must have taken 20 years and the labor of 100,000 people to build, proof of how much the Egyptians valued their pharaohs and their legacy. But how does a civilization rise from the dust to define human history for millennia to come? Like all good things in life, Egypt's old kingdom is coming to an end. Thus began the first transition period, a time of political turmoil that lasted about 150 years. This is one of the darkest periods in Egyptian history, which we have told you about in detail in our previous video. But just as the good doesn't last forever, the bad has an end. More flooding of the Nile brought new prosperity, and around 2040 BC, Egypt was back on its feet with the advent of the Middle Kingdom. This period peaked during the reign of Pharaoh Amenemhat III, who brought peace and stability to the country. However, history is full of twists and turns. A second period of decay occurred, leading to the arrival of the Hyksos, a Semitic-speaking people who conquered much of Lower Egypt around 1650 BC. They founded a new capital, Avaris, and ruled with an iron fist. But the Egyptians did not give up easily. Led by Djamos I, an army from Upper Egypt drove out the Hyksos, marking the beginning of the 18th dynasty. With it began the New Kingdom, an era in which Egypt rose to the status of an international power, reaching its greatest territorial expansion, from Syria to Upper Nubia. It was a period marked by some of the most famous pharaohs in history: Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti, Tutankhamun and Ramses II. When we mention Ramses II, we cannot overlook the fact that many people assume that it was during his reign, according to the biblical account, that Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt to the Promised Land. However, some historians have questioned this chronology because a sensational discovery was made more than 100 years ago, leading them to suggest that the event may have occurred earlier, during the reign of King Amenemhat II. It was the discovery of his tomb and what was found in it that suggests that he was in fact the pharaoh described in Exodus. This is something that is not talked about much, and which we have told you about in detail in a previous video of ours. Meanwhile, in the 6th century BC, Egypt came under the rule of the Achaemenid Empire. However, the tyrannical rule of King Xerxes causes a wave of rebellions, both under him and his successors. In 404 BC, one of these revolts succeeded, beginning the last period of Egyptian independence under local rulers. The 30th dynasty was the last indigenous ruling dynasty during the Pharaonic era. Egypt fell again to Persian rule in 343 BC after the last pharaoh, Nectaneb, was defeated in battle. But history is full of contingencies. Just 10 years later, Alexander the Great, the legendary king of the ancient kingdom of Macedonia, defeated the Persian Empire and annexed Egypt to his kingdom. This was the beginning of the Hellenistic age in Egypt. After Alexander's early death, his general Ptolemy took power and founded the Ptolemaic kingdom, a powerful Hellenistic state stretching from southern Syria in the east to Cyrene in the west, and all the way to the borders of Nubia in the south. Alexandria became the new capital, the center of Greek culture and trade. The Ptolemies were skillful rulers. They realized that to truly rule Egypt, they had to win the hearts of the people. So they adopted Egyptian customs, dressed in Egyptian clothes, and participated in indigenous religious rituals. They even presented themselves as the rightful heirs of the pharaohs, a move that won them the recognition and respect of the local population. However, this raises another very interesting question. How has Egypt, despite the invasions of empires, managed to retain its identity? The last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty was Cleopatra, who committed suicide a few months after burying her beloved Mark Antony. The Ptolemies often faced revolts by the native Egyptians, most often driven by dissatisfaction with foreign rule. They were also involved in foreign and civil wars that eventually weakened the kingdom and led to its annexation by Rome. After the Roman invasion, Egypt quickly became a vital breadbasket for the empire. The city of Alexandria became a key trading center and for a time was considered one of the most important cities in the empire. Egyptian ships regularly sailed to destinations such as India and Ethiopia. Alexandria also developed into a leading scientific and technological center, where scientists such as Ptolemy, Hypatia, and Heron made revolutionary contributions to astronomy, mathematics, and other fields. Culturally, Alexandria often rivaled even Rome itself. Christianity reached Egypt relatively early as the 1st century during the evangelical era, with the credit traditionally attributed to Saint Mark. Alexandria and Antioch quickly became major centers of Christianity. During the reign of Emperor Diocletian began the transition from the classical Roman to the late antique or Byzantine era in Egypt, when many Egyptian Christians were subjected to persecution. By this time, the New Testament had already been translated into Egyptian. Meanwhile, in AD 619, the Sassanid Empire conquered Egypt and ruled the country for 10 years until the rebel Shabaraz made an alliance with the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius and restored Byzantine control over Egypt. The Byzantines continued to rule the country for another 23 years when Egypt was invaded and conquered by the Arab Islamic Empire. The loss of Egypt was a blow from which Byzantium never fully recovered. For many years, it was its breadbasket, providing the grain and goods that kept the empire viable. But when the Arabs conquered Egypt, they brought with them a new faith, Sunni Islam. It was a time of great transformation as Egyptians began to intertwine their new beliefs with old Christian traditions and local practices. This blend gave birth to various Sufi orders that flourish today. For 6 centuries, Muslim rulers appointed by the Islamic Caliphate ruled Egypt. During the Fatimid era, Cairo became the seat of the Caliphate, a center of power and learning that attracted scholars and merchants from all over the world. But with the end of the Ayyubid dynasty, a new power rose, the Mamelukes. These Turkic Cherkis warriors seized power around 1250 and ruled Egypt with an iron hand. In the late 13th century, Egypt became an international trading hub, linking the Red Sea with India, Malaya, and the East Indies. It was a golden age, but it came at a price. The Greek and Coptic languages and culture began to fade like a setting sun, eclipsed by the rise of Arab culture. But the worst was yet to come for Egypt. Something was about to befall the country, something never seen before. In 1347, the Black Death reached Egypt. It spread rapidly from Alexandria to Cairo and beyond. It was a disaster of biblical proportions. In Cairo alone, about a third of the city's population died. When the plague finally subsides, 40% of Egypt's population is dead. This is one of the highest mortality rates of any country during this period. But even in the face of such a devastating catastrophe, the Mamelukes continued to rule. Their rule, however, is not destined to last forever. In 1517, a new power emerged from the north, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman invasion pushed the Egyptian system into decline. Defensive militarization damaged civil society and economic institutions. The weakening of the economic system, combined with the effects of the plague, made Egypt vulnerable to foreign invasions. At this point, Portuguese traders saw their chance and invaded, taking control of Egypt's trade. Yet, this was not the end of the troubles for the country. Between 1687 and 1731, Egypt experienced a series of recurring famine years. Particularly devastating was the famine of 1784, which claimed the lives of about 1/6 of the entire Egyptian population at the time. 4 years later, like lightning on a stormy night, Napoleon Bonaparte and his French troops invaded Egypt. This brief but tumultuous period led to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, a find that would change the course of history and give birth to a science called Egyptology. Despite early victories and an initially successful expedition into Syria, Napoleon and his Army of the Orient were eventually defeated and forced to withdraw, especially after the supporting French fleet suffered defeat at the Battle of the Nile. The expulsion of the French marked the beginning of a new chaotic period. Ottomans, Mamluks, and Albanians clashed in a power struggle, each side trying to assert its dominance. It is a time of great turmoil. But out of this chaos emerges a personality who would determine the fate of Egypt, Muhammad Ali, commander of the Albanian regiment. He quickly established himself, and in 1805, the Sultan in Istanbul recognized him as Viceroy of Egypt. Although the title implied obedience, it was more of a polite formality. In reality, Ottoman power in Egypt was waning, and Muhammad Ali was master of his own destiny. He established a dynasty that ruled Egypt for almost a century and a half, until the revolution of 1952. But even this dynasty was not immune to outside influence. After 1882, the British took control of Egypt, turning the once powerful dynasty into a puppet regime. British indirect rule continued until the revolution that finally freed Egypt from foreign control. This revolution marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in Egypt's history. On June 18, 1953, the Egyptian Republic was proclaimed, and General Mohammed Naguib became the first president of the Republic. Today, Egypt's gross domestic product stands at around $345 billion, making the country one of the largest economies in Africa, second only to South Africa and Nigeria. Globally, the Egyptian economy is among the top 50 in terms of gross domestic product. And that's not all. The Egyptian military is considered one of the strongest in Africa and the Middle East, with global rankings often within the top 10. But have you ever wondered what might have happened, or rather, what might not have happened, if Napoleon hadn't started his campaign in Egypt? What if the Rosetta Stone had never been discovered? What would we have known about ancient Egyptian civilization and human civilization as a whole? Doesn't that make you wonder if there isn't a whole body of knowledge that eludes us to this day? If so, click now on the video to the left of the screen to discover some hidden secrets about the Persian Empire that you've never heard before. But before you do, leave a comment. Would you like a detailed video about the Rosetta Stone?